Prosecutions for death threats against U.S. politicians spiked last year. Arrests for violent threats against high-profile U.S. politicians spiked in 2018. There were a 130% increase over 2017, when there were 10, according to Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse track. The uptick came at the number of prosecutions, which don't necessarily correspond with actual threats, can represent the government's willingness to press cases at any given time. Researchers say that 3 cases of defendants who threatened the life of political figures came to various stages of resolution in federal courtrooms last week. In one, an of threatening to kill former President Barack Obama and Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the California Democrat. In another, of anyone who knowingly and willfully threatens to kill, kidnap, or inflict bodily harm upon members of their families, presidential and vice presidential candidates, or members of their families within 120 days of the general election faces up to 5 years in prison on each count and a $250,000 fine. Threatening to kill a Secret Service spokesman declined to say how many open threats they are investigating against the president and the other individuals the agency protects. Past estimates. Here is a look at prosecutions for threats against sitting presidents, as gathered by the Syracuse team. In 2010, Democratic lawmakers reported receiving over their support of the Affordable Care Act. Republican Michael Lodenthal, director of TPP, a statistical modeling lab at Miami University of Ohio, says federal decision-making dictates how prosecutorial focus and strategy fluctuate with administrations and the prevailing political climate. He noted that these arrests subsided in the Obama years as U.S. strategy changed focus, and Obama shifted focus to extrajudicial assassinations overseas. Lodenthal tells Quartz, "We can expect these prosecutions for threats against federal officials in general. It's the highest rate." A data analysis performed for Quartz by Athena Chapakis and Lauren Donahoe have found that about 75% of those charged for making threats against U.S. politicians come from the ideological right, based on cases they are almost in. Trump has rejected the idea that his own rhetoric may be responsible for inciting any threats or attacks. After Trump, it seems entirely logical that people who feel change is possible through the ballot box don't feel compelled to engage in extrajudicial violence, says Lodenthal. At the same time, Nathan Calmo, now an assistant professor of political communication at Louisiana State University, found that even mild violent language increases support for political violence among citizens with aggressive predispositions, especially among young adults. Court filings by the defendant's lawyer in the upstate New York case link his threats to Waters in which the president called her an extraordinarily low IQ person. Now awaiting sentence. Jonathan Lacroix, a former Secret Service agent who was part of Obama's protective team, says that a slight variation in language can mean the difference between agents showing up at your front door or not. There is an investigative process that takes a very deep dive into everything I can possibly know about this individual, Lacroix tells Quartz. You go backwards. Agents then assign a risk rating to each person who make a threat that is discovered. The higher the rating, what we're looking for are changes in behavioral patterns, says Lacroix. Everybody who roughly 75% of people who come to the attention of the Secret Service as potentially dangerous suffer from some sort of mental illness. Putting them in jail is a last resort, it's not like normal law enforcement, says former Secret Service agent Angela Herdliska. Oftentimes, simply making a threat is often not a major risk factor, she tells Quartz, explaining that a person that is highly motivated to do harm won't typically verbalize it. Everybody has stress, Herdliska says. We're looking for people. U.S. courts have tried to strike a balance between the government's desire to protect the president and Americans' free speech rights. The difference between the Secret Service's protective intelligence reports reflect a suspect's criminal history and the opinion of the investigator, based on the facts talking to that person's roommate, spouse, whoever is in a position to know what his activities have been recently, says Herdliska. Agents, what are tech entrepreneur Matt Harrigan says he was just kidding around with his buddies and a bit drunk when I am going to kill the president-elect. Bring it Secret Harrigan, now 44, tells Quartz it was a friend of a friend grabbed a screenshot, stripped the image of necessary context. He says his post was accompanied by a picture of Ron Burgundy, the Will Ferrell character from Anchorman, as part of a larger joke among his friends, and circulated it on alt-right message boards. That's when Trump, a few days later, the Secret Service showed up. The agents questioned Harrigan, evaluated his psychological state, and searched his home. Harrigan, the end result was that the Secret Service was required to interview me, which was very unfortunate, as I am sure they have actual important work to do, says Harrigan, who also says he lost his job at the company he founded over the incident. They looked around the house, and that was it, says Harrigan. He says he hasn't heard from the feds since.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.